welcome. Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and as you can tell, special show for Halloween. Happy Halloween to you. Please drive carefully. I know you're supposed to say that, but it's true. Really, drive carefully. There'll be little people out. But so that's the weird questions music. So we're going to do some weird Halloween questions today for the celebration of All Hallows Eve. So I won't be giving out the phone number. Well, I probably will be giving out the phone number, but when I do, it will be a mistake. Jimmy Akin, of course, our guest, always our guest when we do these weird questions episode. Jimmy, thanks for being with us.
Happy Halloween, Cy Kellett. How you doing?
I'm very well. Happy Halloween to you as well.
So to start out, I have a question for you.
Okay.
So you said this is All Hallows Eve.
Yes.
What's a hallow?
Saint or something is hallowed if it's holy, so it's All Saints Day as well.
Correct.
I should have said that. Yeah,
correct. It's the eve, so that's the eve part of All Saints Day. And hallow and holy come from the same root. In German, in modern German, it's Heilige, but it just means holy. And so a hallow is something that's holy, and when we apply it to a human, it's a saint. So it's the eve of All Saints Day. That's also what we're saying every time we say the Lord's Prayer. When we say, hallowed be thy name, we're saying, may people treat your name as holy.
Yeah. And this is an ancient feast of the church, and it's followed by the Feast of All Souls. So we get we get All Hallows Eve. That's what tonight we're celebrating the eve of the Holy Day, which is All Saints Day. And on All Saints Day, we're celebrating really the victory of the saints, I suppose is the way to say it.
Well, sure, yeah, and then we have All Souls Day for the souls who are still being purified and on their way to heaven. And since their salvation is secure, they're also saints, although they're not in heaven yet. And you lump all three of those together, and we have what used to be called Hallowtide or Hallow Time.
All right. So I guess I'm going to start you with a question here that I'm glad we're starting with, because the thing that people will immediately talk about when you talk about All Hallows Eve is, one of the things, the claims is, you say that, but actually it's it comes from other roots than the Catholic Church. So I want to start out with a question from Gareth, who asks about something like that. Gareth says, in Wales, many claim Halloween came about because of the Celtic feast of Samhain.
Samhain. I know it's spelled Samhain, but it's pronounced Samhain.
Oh, all right. It freaks me out, that word, a little bit, because I think the son of Sam has something to do with that. Wasn't Samhain one
Yeah.
Or
so
Samhain is what I'm supposed to say.
David Berkowitz was the son of Sam Killer a few decades ago in New York City, and he claims, and there is actually pretty good evidence to back this up, that he wasn't alone in doing those killings, that he was one of the killers, but that they were he was part of a ritual group that worshipped a pagan god known as Samhain, although back then you couldn't look up how to pronounce things on the internet because there was no internet, and so they were mispronouncing it as Samhain based on the way it's spelled.
Like me. So this question then is about the Celtic festival of Samhain. Is it true? When did All Saints begin? Does it predate Samhain? If not, are the dates coincidental? Is this a case of if the church chooses a date, it's always going to coincide with something somewhere in the world?
Well, in essence, yes. So Samhain is a Gaelic festival that was used in like Irish and Scottish culture and so forth. And it is dated to October 31st. There are certain key dates in the year. You have the solstices and the equinoxes, and Samhain falls kind of between the summer solstice and the winter equinox, and so it's also related to harvest time and things like that, and so it was something they did in Celtic lands. Cy Kellett, Is Rome a Celtic land?
No, it is not. It is far
No.
from the Celtic lands.
Yeah, and so this reveals the one of the problems with this. This is a kind of cultural myopia. It's like when people say, "Ooh, the English word Easter might be based on the name of a pagan goddess, therefore Easter is pagan." Well, okay, you know where Easter started? Jerusalem.
Yeah.
They didn't worship pre-Christian British gods in Jerusalem. I mean, England is way far away. And so, what this is an instance where people are familiar with one culture, like from the British Isles, and they're treating it as if that's universal and is going to explain something that applies to the entire Christian world. Well, no, that's not the correct explanation either for Easter or for Halloween. What happened was in the early church, they would have, saint days where they'd commemorate saints, and sometimes there would be groups of martyrs that were all martyred on the same day. And so it would be common to have a commemoration of all of the martyrs who died on the same day. And eventually, the church started to say, okay, well, we have these different saints, but we know they're not all of them. Not all of the saints are on our liturgical calendar. So we want to have something that commemorates all of them, and even the ones we don't know about. And so they implemented that, and it got implemented on a few different days during the year over the course of history and in different places. But in the 700s, Pope Gregory III dedicated a chapel or oratory in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome to all of the saints. And according to various sources, it was dedicated on November 1st, and it thus got onto the Roman liturgical calendar on November 1st. Halloween was then formed as the eve anticipating that holy day. But you don't get onto the Roman liturgical calendar because some pagans up in England are doing something
Right.
the day before. So Halloween has nothing to do with Samhain. It's a kind of cultural myopia that leads to those claims. Really what happened is the church decided in Rome that they wanted to have a feast commemorating all of the saints on November 1st, and it just so happened that a bunch of pagan yahoos up in the British Isles were doing something the day before.
Pagan yahoos.
Well, that's kind of where the word pagan comes from. I mean, it kind of means Yahoo.
Right.
In Latin, paganus means like a rustic person,
Yeah.
a hick, because Christianity spread first in the cities.
So
That's where the people are.
Gareth also included this because I gather that Gareth is Welsh himself. And so he wrote this, Jimmy. You're going to have to help me with my Welsh pronunciation, but he wrote, I would say diolch, Jimmy.
Yeah.
Really?
Diolch. Yeah.
Diolch, Jimmy. Your show is fantastic, as we say in Wales. I don't know how I did on the second one there.
Yeah, well, no, it's just fantastic. Fantastic is just an alternate spelling. But yeah, diolch is Welsh for thank you. And so croesaw, Gareth. My pleasure.
Ah, very good.
It means you're welcome.
Gareth, thank you so much for starting us off with that question. It's for Halloween. We're doing Halloween weird questions with Jimmy Akin. We love to. I'm sure will be all kinds of weird questions, but perfect thing for Halloween. And the next one follows in a similar vein. But Mark asks this: how would you address the deeply Catholic origins of the holiday, and how those got twisted into what we have today?
Well, we've sort of covered the origins of Halloween. In terms of how we got the modern version, it's really an American creation. What happened was, so early in American history, you had a few people in America in the colonial period celebrating Halloween. They were primarily Catholics, so for them it was just the eve of All Saints' Day. You also had some Anglicans do that, but not up in Puritan New England, because the Puritans were like totally down on fun, yeah. And so then in the 19th century, we had waves of Irish and Scottish immigration to the United States. And, like the Irish potato famine in the 1840s was one of the drivers of that, because there was no food available in Ireland for reasons we won't go into. But you had all these Irish and Scottish immigrants, and they brought various customs with them, including things like using jack-o'-lanterns on Halloween. Although the jack-o'-lanterns originally weren't pumpkins, they were turnips. So you'd get like a big turnip and carve it into a face and put a candle in it. And so these customs got introduced, and there were a bunch of them. And then in the 20th century, when mass media and marketing began, people realized you could make a buck off of this. And so we got one of the classic phenomena of the 20th century was the commercialization of American culture, and that's what ruined Christmas, and that's what ruined Halloween. And then the dominance of American media in the globally in the post-World War II period led that to be broadcast to everybody in the world, and that's how we got modern Halloween.
Mark, thank you very, very much for the question. More weird Halloween questions to come, but I better take the first break. We'll take that break and be right back with more of our weird questions for Halloween with Jimmy Akin.
Catch Catholic Answers live anytime at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Check out EWTN's official YouTube channel.
Just follow the link on our homepage at EWTN.com or go to YouTube.com/EWTN.
Watch EWTN's live shows or today's homily from the Daily Mass.
Click the upload button to see our most recent clips.
You can also find all of EWTN YouTube content by clicking the playlist button.
It's all on the official EWTN YouTube channel at YouTube.com/EWTN.
Visit today.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Celebrating Halloween, the eve of All Hallows. Tomorrow's a holy day for Catholics, where we go to Mass and remember the saints. And been doing that for centuries and centuries and centuries. So the eve of that is All Hallows Eve, where we get the word Halloween. And we're doing some weird Halloween questions. Perfect time to do weird questions with Jimmy Akin, Halloween. And this one comes from Amanda. Jimmy, what was your favorite Halloween candy when you were a child, and what was your favorite costume?
Well, so I don't remember having a particular candy that was my favorite. I remember liking candy corn. Probably one of my all-time favorite childhood candy was something called a cherry mash. And what that was it was like a ball of cherry-flavored marzipan that had been dipped in chocolate that contained nuts in the chocolate. And so you'd have this chocolate confection with nuts, and you'd bite into it, and there would be cherry marzipan in the center. And I really loved those.
We had them on the show together one time.
Yeah, we did. You found some, which was great. Thank you so much for that. But I don't remember particularly eating those on Halloween. But that would have been my favorite candy as a child. One thing I remember as a Halloween candy that I only ever saw at Halloween was, and this would have been like early 1970s, like 1971, 1972, was a kind of a drink in a little wax bottle.
Oh, I remember those.
Yeah, and so even though you could get a full-size Coke in a glass bottle, for Halloween they had these little candies. They were like an inch or two tall, and they were made out of wax, and they were flat. They weren't round bottles, but they were flat imitations of bottles. And you would bite off the head of the bottle, because it's just wax, and then you would suck out the liquid that was inside of it, which I remember like being blue or other colors.
Yeah.
And it was just a little sweet drink. And I remember those at Halloween, and I remember I liked biting into the wax bottles and sucking out the liquid.
Yeah. Yeah. Were you? Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. But I'll also do costumes. But go ahead.
I just didn't know if you were of the age when. Remember, there was like the Halloween scare that would come every year. They would report on TV that they were going to put razors in your apples and stuff. And
yeah, I remember Halloween before those scares, which were sort of they were around a lot in the mid 1970s, and they kind of killed some of the fun for people, and it was all based on overblown rumors. That didn't really, it was not as dangerous as people were making it sound.
Yeah.
But there was kind of what was known as a moral panic at the time about it. And later there were moral panics on other things, like the Satanism moral panic in the 1990s and so forth.
But my mom very helpfully tested our candy for us before we would. She was very helpful in that regard. She just take the first bite, make sure there's nothing bad in there, then you could have it.
Okay. Well, whatever works. Glad Mom's on the lookout.
Yeah.
So in terms of costumes, they had, and I remember as a kid, those kind of, and I gather they still have them, those kind of store-bought low-grade costumes where like there'll be kind of a cheap costume that you made out of some kind of bizarrely slick polyester fabric that you would wear, and then they'd have like a very thin plastic mask with a rubber band that you would put over your face.
Yeah.
I at least early on, I don't really remember wearing those. I remember seeing those, but I don't remember wearing those because my mom made much better costumes than that.
Oh.
And as a little child, I was growing up in the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas, and this was before cable television existed, at least in Arkansas. And so we had only a few stations we could get. One of them was Channel 8 from Tulsa. And every Friday night they had a horror show, a horror movie. And originally it was called Boo Theater. And it was hosted by a character named Dr. Boo, who was like a mad scientist. And he had a sidekick for comic relief sidekick that would accompany him in the sketches, that they would use for commercial breaks as they're showing a horror movie. So they're showing these classic horror movies like Dracula and Frankenstein and stuff, but then they'd have these host segments. And Dr. Boo's sidekick was Melvin the Crummy Dummy Mummy. And so I remember one year I was like 6 or 7 and I wanted a mummy costume. And my mom took clothing, like blue jeans, and sewed strips of torn sheets onto it to make the mummy wrappings.
Wow.
And so I could just put on these pants and a shirt and a mask and stuff, and I'm a mummy. And I think about the work that went into making that costume.
Right.
I remember my mom doing it, but I mean that was an intense bit of work to sew mummy wrappings onto clothing. I mean, she used a machine to do it, but still, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And for a few hours of payoff on Halloween.
Yeah.
And so I just really admire my mom doing that. Also, because I like the horror movies, I liked Dracula, and one year I wanted to be a Dracula and, a vampire. And my mom made a black cape for me, and it wasn't just a single sheet of black fabric. It was like double folded, and you could tie it around your neck. She put ties on it and everything. And I remember wearing that cape. I didn't just wear it for Halloween. It was a fun cape. And so looking back, I would have to say those two, the mummy costume and the Dracula costume, were my favorite ones that my mom made for me.
That's very nice. Amanda, thank you very, very much. It's Weird Halloween Questions with Jimmy Akin this hour and next as we celebrate Halloween. And up next comes from Robert. And Robert asks this: if I were to dress up as a Knight Templar for Halloween, putting on the habit of a Knight of the Order, would I be in violation of papal bull Vox in Excelso and thereby excommunicated? The bull suppressed the order of the temple and specifically stated that anyone wearing the habit of the order would be subject to latae sensae, excommunication.
Okay, so first of all, I probably should note that the bull did not entirely suppress the Order of the Templars. There is at least one survival of the Order of Templars that is in Europe today. And I did an episode of Mysterious World on the Templars a while back, so you can go listen to that if you want, and it'll give the history of that and talk about the surviving remnant. But yeah, most of the order was suppressed. And at the time, putting on the habit of the Templars would have been very confusing. And so I can understand they would excommunicate people for all kinds of stuff back then. So I could understand that excommunication in the time. But there are two legal doctrines that are relevant here. The first one is a concept called desuetude. Desuetude is when a law falls out of use and loses its force. Because even though it may technically still be on the books, it hasn't been enforced or implemented in ages. And at some point, it just loses its force through non-use. So the bull could have fallen into desuetude at some point, but there's a second doctrine that is even more relevant, which is that when a section of the law is integrally reordered, then all prior laws on that topic lose their force. And so that would have happened even if Vox in Excelso would have still been in force up to 1917, and I doubt that very much. But even if it was, then the release of the 1917 Code of Canon Law integrally reordered the entirety of Catholic law with very few exceptions, and so the bull would have lost force at that point. It even more would have lost force with the release of the 1983 Code, which integrally reordered the law again, causing the 1917 Code to lose its force. And so today, if you're going to be excommunicated, whether latae sententiae or otherwise, latae sententiae excommunication is automatic excommunication. A bishop doesn't have to issue a decree. You've just automatically excommunicated yourself. The other kind, where a bishop declares the excommunication, is known as ferende sententiae excommunication. But in order to be excommunicated today, whether latae or not, you have to violate one of the canons in the Code of Canon Law that has excommunication attached as a penalty, or at least a possible penalty. And wearing the habit of the Knights Templar is not one of those. So if you want to go as a Templar for Halloween, be my guest.
Go ahead. I hope you find the treasure. Because it's out there somewhere, right? Knights Templar treasure. I'm pretty sure that the History Channel has done several shows on the Knights Templar treasure, unless the aliens got it.
Quite a few shows, yes.
Yeah. It's Halloween weird questions with Jimmy Akin this hour. We hope you are having a happy Halloween. And I'll remind you again, if you're in the car, be careful. Come on, there's little kids out there. And Jimmy, you also are the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. What's coming up Friday on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World?
Well, we're going to be looking at an incident from 1964 that occurred in Socorro, New Mexico. There was a police officer who was chasing a speeding driver when he heard an enormous roar in the sky. And then he saw a flame in the sky, and he remembered there's a dynamite shack nearby. Maybe it blew up, and maybe someone needs help. And so he abandoned, his name was Lonnie Zamora. Officer Zamora stopped chasing the speeding driver. He went to go find the dynamite shack. And when he did, he saw a UFO on the ground with occupants on the outside of the UFO. And it was a brief encounter, but it then took off and flew away, and it left traces on the ground. There were imprints where its landing gear had been on the ground.
What?
And this is New Mexico, so you've got this chaparral environment. The scrub on the ground is burning and singed from where it took off. And this is one of the Lonnie Zamora Socorro, New Mexico UFO case is considered one of the best documented UFO landing cases of all time. And so this Friday, we're going to be talking about that.
Wow. And did he say what the people look like? Like, did they look like humans, or did they look like little green men, or?
He said that they looked like they were wearing white overalls, and they either were normal height or maybe a little shorter, but they looked pretty human to him.
Possibly Knights Templar, who are now working for the aliens. We'll find out on Friday on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. More weird questions with Jimmy Akin for this Halloween, right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live.
Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says Cy Kellett. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, Cy presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
What if the voice of your deepest doubts about Catholicism rose up in the form of a human being and challenged you to defend your most foundational beliefs? That's the task apologist Trent Horn took upon himself in his new book, Devil's Advocate, a dialogue with his own best objections against the faith that he professes and defends. You can stand up against your doubts, and Trent will show you how. Pick up your copy of Devil's Advocate today at shop.catholic.com or at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity in The Early Church Was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Welcome back. Happy Halloween. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. We got some weird questions for Jimmy, and here's a really weird one, Jimmy. This comes from Justin. Justin says, Jimmy, I've got a story that happened to me, and I'd love your thoughts on it. I went to a Benedictine Catholic liberal arts college in the Midwest. One night during the week of Halloween, I was up late at night, 1 a.m., working on a Russian history paper. I was in my dorm room, working with just my lamp on, and suddenly, my roommate was asleep behind me. He sat up on the bottom bunk. Suddenly, I heard him sit up, so I turn and I look at him, and he looks at me with a weird, distant look on his face, and he says, "You have something dead in your school." I assume I misheard him, so I just say, "What?" "You have something dead in your school," he says again. "What?" "You have something dead in your school." At this point, I reason that he's very actively sleep-talking, and I say as much. "You're talking in your sleep, man. Go back to sleep." He looks at me with an odd half-smirk, nods, and just lays back down and falls back into sleep. I think nothing else of this and go to bed after printing off my paper. I come to find out that at that same time as this took place, around 1 a.m., one of the monks at the abbey had passed. So, just coincidence? Some sort of heralding? I'd love your thoughts.
Okay. So this is apparently this is an apparent reported paranormal experience, and it's difficult to investigate non-recurring paranormal experiences because you don't really have a lot of data. It's much easier to investigate if something is going on a regular basis, like a house is regularly being haunted or something, because then you can gather a lot more data, you can test hypotheses and so forth. But when you just have a one-off spontaneous experience like this, it's harder to evaluate. Having said that, if I were to investigate this, and I know this is in the past, but these are my thoughts, the first thing you do is try to think of every natural explanation that you can, and then see, are they plausible or can they be eliminated? Mm-hmm. And it's only if you can eliminate the natural explanations that you would look at a paranormal one. In this case, the first thing that I would wonder is I'd like to interview the roommate and say, do you remember this experience? Because it could always be coincidence in that the roommate, you said this is Halloween week, so maybe the roommate decides to play a prank and sits up and says something spooky in the middle of the night and then lays back down when you tell him to, and then it was just a coincidence that the monk died at the same time. And if he remembers it, and if you can get him to fess up, well, then that would explain this. On the other hand, if he says he doesn't remember it and he seems sincere, and he's otherwise trustworthy and so forth, then it, certainly warrants further explanation. Now, it could still be coincidence, but it is at least suggestive of something more than coincidence, because you have this unusual correlation of the sleeping roommate announcing a death in the school at the same time a death in the school has just happened. And so I wouldn't rule out, at least based on my present knowledge, I wouldn't rule out that something paranormal happened here. The question would be, what was it? Well, there is a phenomenon that is widely reported in history known as crisis apparitions. A crisis apparition occurs when a either living person or someone who has just died appears to people and communicates with, either appears to them visually or in the form of a voice or both, and makes themselves known to people, usually people that are close to them emotionally. So like lots of people will say, when my mother died or when my father died, I had a dream at that same time, or they appeared to me, or I heard their voice, or something like that. And that would be a crisis apparition. So it could be that that this monk had some kind of crisis apparition at the time of his death that was subconsciously picked up on by the roommate. And the roommate then incorporated that into his sleeping experience, and it came out through his sleep talking. So a crisis apparition that gets picked up on by the roommate, and he says this as part of his sleep talking, because people talk in their sleep, that could be one explanation. It could be something else too. Reportedly, and this is just the claim, but it's claimed that psychic functioning occurs more easily when people are in a relaxed state, and like if they're asleep or something like that. That's why the claim is that's why people sometimes have precognitive dreams. Now, sometimes a dream can just be coincidence, but sometimes it's claimed it'll be way too specific to be random chance. And so it could be that the roommate, there was no crisis apparition, but instead the roommate was in a relaxed state and he mentally senses the death occurring and then incorporates that into his sleep talk. And in that case, telepathy would be the explanation. Telepathy would also be involved in a crisis apparition, but it would be the roommate's telepathy in this case, as opposed to the monk projecting the fact of his death. Then it could be something else. It could be clairvoyance, where the roommate senses what's happening with the monk clairvoyantly. And all of this could be God giving the roommate a nudge, or allowing a saint or angel to give the roommate a nudge that this is happening. And it comes out in his sleep talk. So I can't say that this is a paranormal or supernatural experience based on the data, but I wouldn't rule it out either. But like I said, it's difficult to evaluate one-off spontaneous events because they're non-recurrent and you can't gather a lot of data and rigorously test them as you could if they were occurring on a regular basis.
Thank you very much for the great story, Justin, and the question. I appreciate it. Jimmy, can I just ask a clarifying thing? Because you say paranormal or supernatural. What's the difference between those two things?
Well, there's not a rigorous difference in this is the definition problem of what even counts as paranormal or what counts as supernatural is actually debated in parapsychology. But the way I use the terms, I would say something, I mean, at least when it comes to something like this. Now, paranormal, properly speaking, would be anything that is not normal.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where it comes from. Para is Greek. It means alongside.
Yeah.
And so a paranormal experience would be something that happens alongside normal experiences, but isn't normal. Supernatural, so super is Latin for above. Yeah. And so it's a supernatural event is something that comes from above nature. And we associate that with God and angels and saints and demons too, for that matter, because they're above human nature and what we ordinarily experience in the natural world. So what I tend to do to distinguish the paranormal and the supernatural, sometimes I'll use the terms as synonyms. In that case, I'll tend to use paranormal and include supernatural within it. But if I'm distinguishing them, I would use paranormal to refer to things like psychic functioning that are claimed to be part of human nature. There's a common claim, the common understanding of psychic abilities are that they're things that we have in us, and there have been Catholic that God built into us. There have been Catholic parapsychologists like Father Alois Feisinger, who have proposed that psychic abilities are really the remnants of the paranormal gifts that our first parents would have had before the fall, but they're weak and unreliable now because of original sin. And then presumably once we're resurrected and in glorified form, we'll have all those abilities back full force. But I would tend to use, if I'm distinguishing the paranormal and the supernatural, I would tend to use paranormal for things that are part of human nature or believed to be part of human nature. And then I would use supernatural for things that are not believed to be part of the nature of a living human. So that would be God, angels, saints, demons, that kind of stuff.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Jimmy. Boy, we got a whole bunch more and some just fantastic Halloween-related and other weird questions on this Halloween for Jimmy Akin. So hang on. We'll take a very quick break, and we'll be right back with more weird questions for Jimmy Akin on this Halloween.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley of the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Do you love praying for people? Have you ever wanted to use your gift of prayer to share Jesus with others and build up the body of Christ? Start a public prayer station with St. Paul Street Evangelization. Listen to people's needs, pray with them, or invite them to meet you at church. St. Paul Street Evangelization can help you get started. Find out how at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
He was a Jesuit, a cardinal, and a doctor of the Church.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Robert Bellarmine is honored for his immense contributions to theology, including helping to draft 2 important catechisms that defended church teachings during the Protestant Revolt. Pope Clement VIII named Bellarmine a cardinal because, as the Pope put it, Bellarmine had not his equal for learning.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
Love that weird music. I love it because it means Jimmy's here answering weird questions for us, but also it's just really cool music. I like it a lot, and happy Halloween to you. Perfect time to do weird questions with Jimmy Akin. Jimmy, this one comes from Jason. Who's the best Dracula?
Well, I would say, now there have been a lot of people who played Dracula, including very recently. For example, the British TV producer Stephen Moffat, who's known for doing Doctor Who and Sherlock, recently did like a 3-part miniseries on Dracula, which had some very interesting aspects to it, also, modern stuff. But I would say historically, the best Dracula would have to be either Bela Lugosi, who starred in the 1931 version of Dracula, as well as other films, or Christopher Lee, who began playing Dracula in the 1958 Hammer Films version of Dracula. They both have interesting qualities as Dracula. Bela Lugosi is more suave and sinister, and talks more, whereas Christopher Lee's Dracula is much more direct and animalistic, and is not the kind of upper class sophisticate that Bela Lugosi's is. What I will say is the best ever Dracula death scene is the death scene in the 1958 Christopher Lee Dracula. Really? You have Peter Cushing as Van Helsing, and in their final confrontation where Van Helsing kills Dracula, you've got Peter Cushing confronting Christopher Lee, and they're in a castle. And this is color, by the way. So they're in this dining room in a castle, and Dracula is fast and brutal, and he's going after Van Helsing. Van Helsing is desperately trying to defend himself, and he takes from the long dining table in the dining hall, he takes 2 candlesticks and crosses them to try to ward off Dracula, and then he runs down the dining table towards the window, which is covered by drapes, and the sun's coming up, and he leaps onto the drapes and yanks them down with the force of his body falling. So the sunlight shines in, spears the foot of Christopher Lee's Dracula, and it instantly turns to ash. And Dracula screams, and then the sunlight progressively kills him as he turns into ash.
That is good.
And it is the most dramatic Dracula death scene ever.
If people don't know who Christopher Lee is, they probably know him as Saruman from the Peter Jackson movies.
Yeah, or Count Dooku from Star Wars.
Oh, that's right.
The less said about that, the better.
Yeah. Kind of a very famous kind of B-movie actor, and Ian McKellen, who played Gandalf, I remember in an interview said he was really impressed with what a good actor Lee was, because he had a reputation of kind of doing the B-movies, but he was very impressed with what a good actor he was.
He is a very good actor. He is also a devout Catholic. And,
I didn't know that.
And would talk about his faith and warn people against dabbling in demonic stuff and say you'll destroy your soul. Do not do that, even though he was a horror actor. Also, Peter Cushing, who played Van Helsing in this movie, he was a very good actor too. Now, he was Grand Moff Tarkin in the original Star Wars.
Right. Oh, yes, that's right.
And he was known for his creative use of props. He would, as part of his acting routine, he'd prepare for a role and he'd go to play the part, and the crew had no idea what was going to happen. But he would just start pulling out props and doing stuff with them as he's acting, and they had no idea that he had this pre-planned routine that he was going to do to accentuate his verbal performance. He didn't want to stop with just the words. He wanted to physicalize things with objects in his environment, and he would even bring the objects himself to use. And they nicknamed him Props Cushing.
Well, I was surprised to not hear any mention of a really impressive Dracula, George Hamilton.
Who?
George. George Hamilton, Love at First Bite, 1979.
Oh, yeah, okay. No, I know the actor George Hamilton. I don't recall if I've ever seen Love at First Bite. Maybe I have.
It's a comedy, and poor Dracula gets evicted from his castle by the Romanian communists, and it has to go to New York City. And there he meets Susan St. James, which, what luck. All right, Jason, thanks for that question. This one comes from Sean. What does Jimmy feel is the better TV show, The Addams Family or The Munsters, and why?
So I like both of those. They're both fun. They're both nice monster-themed situation comedies. Historically, though, I would have to say that I prefer The Addams Family. I mean, I like them both, but I prefer The Addams Family because it is not on the nose. It is more subtle. It is more complex. On the Munsters, it's very slapstick.
Yes.
Herman Munster is a Frankenstein. Lily is a vampire. Grandpa is a vampire. Eddie is a werewolf, and then you have Cousin Marilyn. So it's very on the nose. These are very recognizable, classic Universal Studios horror monsters, and they're just played for comedy. So it's very broad, to use a kind of industry term. It's not subtle comedy. The Addams Family, though, they're subtle. I mean, they're all off in various ways. I mean, they're creepy and they're kooky, they're mysterious and spooky, but not in an easily identifiable way.
Yeah.
I mean, what is Gomez Addams?
I don't know, but don't speak French around him.
Yeah, well, he's and the same is true of Wednesday and Pugsley and all of them. I mean, Grandmama, you could say is a witch, but that's not her defining trait. She's not like wearing a hat and carrying a broomstick or anything. Uncle Fester is weird,
because he's bald.
Morticia is he makes light bulbs light up when he puts them in his mouth.
Oh,
and
yeah,
he wears a monk's robe.
Right.
Morticia is weird. They're all weird, but none of them are classic stereotypes.
Oh, I never thought of that.
And I appreciate that subtlety and going beyond the broad, easy form of humor to make it more subtle. I like that.
It's weird questions for Jimmy Akin for this Halloween. The great Fred Wynn, though. I mean, what a...
Oh, Fred Gwynn is awesome. Yeah.
Chris asks this, Jimmy. This is more of a funny question than a weird question, I think. Why do all the Star Wars Force ghosts have to sit down when imparting lengthy advice to Luke?
Well, I try to take every question seriously, so they don't get tired of standing while they're imparting lengthy advice.
But
that's it. That's simple answer.
You
Same
just
reason
don't think of a ghost as tiring out, though.
Well, same reason living people sit down when they're imparting lengthy advice.
I don't actually know the background of this one, so you'll have to tell us.
Okay.
Amanda asks this on behalf of her daughter. She says, my daughter Fiona wants to know if Annabelle, the doll, is really possessed by a demon. Fiona wants me to clarify that she's asking about the real doll in the Occult Museum, not the movie.
Okay, so Annabelle is a Raggedy Ann doll that around 1970, I think, was given to Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were they were a Catholic couple, but they weren't the most Orthodox Catholics. Lorraine Warren, if I recall correctly, and she was a medium, and her husband her husband Ed, billed himself as a demonologist, and allegedly they participated in exorcisms and things like that. And people have asked me to do a Mysterious World episode on Ed and Lorraine Warren, and I will at some point. But the research I've done on them thus far is I'm not very impressed with them. Among other things, they got taken in by the Amityville Horror, which was a hoax.
Yeah.
I mean, that was it. The Amityville Horror was a hoax invented to make money, and they got taken in by it. So I'm not particularly impressed with their critical thinking and research skills. But they were given a doll. It was a Raggedy Ann doll by a nurse, and the nurse claimed that there was a spirit in the doll and that the spirit identified itself as Annabelle. And so this became known as a cursed doll, and the Warrens had a kind of occult museum that they put a lot of stuff in, and Annabelle was one of the exhibits. Now, they've both passed on now, and the museum is closed, so I don't know where Annabelle is now, but that's where she was for a long time. And eventually they made a movie about it, which is why Fiona says, I'm talking about the real one, not the movie one. Well, so this cursed doll theme is something that's actually pretty new. It appears to have been popularized by, as with any paranormal report, you want to think, what are the natural explanations, and consider those first before you resort to a paranormal explanation. Now, I know it's claimed that Annabelle had a demon or another kind of spirit in it, but where's the evidence? I'm not aware of any good evidence that would suggest that this doll was actually infested with a demon or haunted by a ghost. Instead, this trope of having a haunted evil doll is something that appears to come from movies and television. Because you may remember back in the 80s, we had the Child's Play movies with Chucky, who was a serial killer evil doll. And there have been other evil doll figures in movies and television. In fact, it looks like Annabelle herself is based directly on an old episode of The Twilight Zone, which was a TV show in the 50s and 60s. And there's an episode of The Twilight Zone called Living Doll. And this is a famous one. If you've ever seen clips from The Twilight Zone, this is the Talkie Tina episode. So there's a doll in the episode Living Doll named Talkie Tina. And since it's The Twilight Zone, this is eerie and spooky and things like that. And the mother who buys the talking doll in this episode of Twilight Zone is named Annabelle. And that conjunction of the rare name Annabelle with the idea of a creepy, evil female doll strongly suggests that the real-life Annabelle is based on some kind of warping of this Twilight Zone episode and is not really paranormal at all. And so I would say that I don't see any evidence for the real-world Annabelle being infested by a demon or haunted by a ghost.
Gotcha. All right. That'll probably do it for this hour as far as weird questions for Jimmy Akin, but we got a whole bunch more weird questions about all kinds of stuff. Lots of stuff I never would have thought of. That's why I love these weird questions with Jimmy Akin. So hang around. We're going to continue that. Actually, I might have time to do another one. Jimmy, do you feel like we got?
Sure. Go ahead.
All right. Let's do Ryan. Ryan asks us, what exactly are the difference between exorcisms and deliverances? How accurate are the depictions in movies overall, and which movie or show is most accurate? Also, were any of the canonized saints ever possessed by a demon?
Okay, so taking the questions one at a time, both deliverance and exorcism involve freeing a person from demonic influence. And exorcism is basically a deliverance that's done with a formal rite. And in order to perform the rite, you have to be a priest and be properly qualified. So a deliverance is kind of an informal prayer-based exorcism that doesn't use the rite of exorcism, but they both involve freeing someone from demonic influence. In terms of depictions of exorcisms in movies and TV shows, I really can't say, because watching possession exorcism movies is not my thing. So I really couldn't say which are the most accurate. Have there been canonized saints possessed by demons? Well, Mary Magdalene.
Yeah, that's always the first one you think of, yeah.
Out of whom Jesus drove 7 demons. Presumably, though, that was before she was a Christian. So have there been any that were long-standing Christians who got possessed? Well, I know there have been ample discussions of demons attacking religious people, like St. Anthony of the Desert, the father of monasticism. St. Ignatius of Loyola was reportedly choked by a demon, and there have been other reports, but I'm not specifically aware of one who was fully possessed. though I would have to do further research on that subject.
There are indeed lots and lots of saints, so that would take a long time. But thanks very much for the questions. More weird questions for Jimmy Akin on this Halloween episode coming up right after this. Just hang on. We'll be right back with lots and lots of weirdness, some cool music, maybe some ghosts, some more Dracula. I don't know, actually, but a lot of cool stuff coming up right after this. Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. We love to do these weird questions shows with Jimmy Akin, and what's a better day of the year than, I can't think of a single day of the year better to do weird questions on than Halloween. So as a little bit of a Halloween celebration, we're doing weird questions with Jimmy Akin. Jimmy Akin, of course, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers and the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, where this Friday's show will be about one of the most convincing extraterrestrial encounters ever reported. Is that a fair way to say it?
That's how many people would say it.
Yeah. A police officer reporting seeing a UFO on the ground in New Mexico.
With confirming physical evidence.
So, you know you love Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Check it out on Friday. Actually, every Friday. Plus hundreds of past episodes that you can enjoy at your leisure. I'm not giving out the number today because all of our questions have already been submitted. People love to submit weird questions to Jimmy, and so we've got a ton of them. And this one comes from Drew, who gets something right here that most of us get wrong most of the time, right in the first sentence. My question involves a Frankenstein's monster scenario. He didn't say Frankenstein. Most people call the monster Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And which may be the case. I mean, maybe if you make a monster, it gets your name.
It certainly can.
Yeah.
If people want to call it that, then fine.
So my question involves a Frankenstein's monster scenario. Let's suppose that the monster's body was created as provided in the original novel.
Okay.
Let's also suppose that the body parts were all gathered from baptized persons.
Not unreasonable, given the cultural context.
After coming to life, would the monster need to be baptized in order to have the stain of original sin removed?
Okay, so baptism makes a change in the soul of a person. And if you're ever baptized, you don't need to ever, in fact, you cannot be rebaptized. It's not possible because baptism makes a permanent mark on your soul. So the real question is, would Frankenstein's monster have inherited the soul from any of the people whose body parts went into making his body? Now, ordinarily, we do transfusions today. We take one person's blood and put it in another person. We also take people's organs and transfer them. We transplant organs from one person to another. And actually, believe it or not, there are reports of people who have received transplants inheriting memories from the people from whom the organs came. Yeah. So that's a reported phenomenon. But it doesn't involve the transfer of the rational soul. It's the rational soul that is the overall form of the body. And that's what baptism applies to. So is there any body part that has a special relationship with the overall rational soul? The word reason may be a clue there, because the faculty of reason in human beings is associated with our central nervous system and specifically our brain. And so you could propose that by transplanting the brain of a baptized person and then reanimating the brain, that it's really the same person. All you've really done is a brain transplant, and with the brain temporarily being offline. Now you'd have to do it very quickly because of brain damage, but the longer a brain stays without oxygen from blood, the more damage is done, the more it breaks down. But hypothetically, you could propose that, okay, really all we've done here is a brain transplant. And if you do a brain transplant and you've revived the person from cardiac arrest and they're having their normal mental function or even part of their normal mental function, you could say, yeah, this is the same person. And so if that person was baptized before you transplanted their brain, then you would not need to baptize them again. On the other hand, if the death is a complete death, then which would have to go beyond just cardiac arrest. But if the brain has really totally died, then, well, really there wouldn't be a way to revive it. Or at least arguably there wouldn't. But if you don't have the soul of the original person transferring with the brain, then Frankenstein's monster would be a new person. He would have a new soul because he is alive, and that means he's got a soul. And if he is a rational being, even if he's brain damaged, if he's a rational being, then he's got a rational soul, and he would not have inherited sanctifying grace from the body parts he was made of. So he would be in the same condition as a newborn child and thus would need to be baptized.
All right. Thank you very much for the Frankenstein's monster question. Let's see, where am I here? By the way, it's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin today for Halloween. If you're just joining us, hope you're having a happy Halloween. And I think we'll go to Edwin's question. Edwin asks, Edwin has a series of questions that seem quite specific to his house. Edwin asks, why do things fly off the shelves by themselves? Why do we hear heavy footsteps on our ceiling when we only have a one-story house? Why do our cats avoid a certain spot in the living room and spend hours alertly watching it?
Okay, so we have a number of phenomena being reported here, and as always, the first thing you do is make a list of possible natural explanations and consider them. Why do things fly off the shelf by themselves? Could the shelves be tilted? Could you be living in an area that has earthquakes? Could there be some mechanical system in your house that causes vibrations and causes the objects to vibrate to the edge and then fall off of the shelf? So those would be things you'd want to consider. Why might one hear heavy footsteps on a ceiling in a one-story house? Well, maybe it is the sound of wood adjusting to temperature changes. Mm-hmm. Or maybe you've got a burglar or someone else up on your roof or in your attic, or maybe it's an animal, because people do get animals in their attics, and sometimes sizable ones like possums. I know of cases where haunted houses have been investigated and it turns out it was a possum in the attic. So they can make noises, they can knock stuff over, it could even sound like footsteps. Why do cats avoid a certain spot in the living room and spend hours alertly watching it? Well, because they're cats.
The real question is, why do you have cats, Edwin?
No.
Sorry, that was rude. I apologize, Edwin.
So those would be some natural explanations, but if those things aren't true, then there could be something more going on here. In terms of things flying off shelves, now that's classified as poltergeist activity. And poltergeists can, at least this is the claim, they can be caused by spirits, so like a ghost. I mean, that's what poltergeist means in German. Polter means noisy or rattling, and geist means ghost. So a poltergeist etymologically is a noisy ghost. And there have been reports of spirits that, cause disturbances, like things coming off of shelves and smashing into other things. That actually, though, is not the major theory these days of what poltergeists are. It is thought by many parapsychologists that spirits can and sometimes do produce poltergeist activity, but it is more commonly understood that the poltergeist is the manifestation of a living person, and that what's happening is a living person, without realizing it, has stress and frustrations that they're dealing with, and it causes a natural psychokinetic ability to activate and act itself out as a way of dealing with the frustrations that they're experiencing. And so, and the reason that the theory ended up being proposed is because there usually seems to be a single person who is at the scene of the poltergeist activity, who is under a lot of stress, and frequently as a young person, because being a young person can be a very stressful time of life, and the activity seems to center on that person, but they've eliminated the possibility that the person is causing it normally. And so the proposal was, well, then it is this person who's causing it, but they're causing it paranormally. And so poltergeist activity is commonly believed, at least in the majority of cases these days, to be the result of a living agent, a living person who is dealing with stress, and it's causing a latent psychokinetic ability to manifest in a kind of uncontrolled way. The same thing actually could be responsible for hearing footsteps on the ceiling. That's another way that psychokinetic or mind over matter abilities could manifest. And in terms of cats staring at a certain place, well, A, cats, and B, there could be some unseen presence. I mean, sometimes ghosts are associated with poltergeists, and the cats could be picking up on something that's not presumably mentally picking up on it, but they could be picking up on something that's not visible to human senses, and it could be paranormal, though knowing cats, it also could just be normal.
Edwin, thank you very much. I'm sure your cats are lovely. It's time to take a break. However, we will be right back with more weird Halloween questions for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
We should pray because prayer is conversation with God, and conversation is the only way to build a relationship. We need that relationship with God. We should pray and talk with God about what's on our hearts, what's on our minds, what's active in our lives, the joys we have. We should share all of these with God. Prayer is conversation, and conversation is the only way to build a relationship with God. It's the most important relationship. All of our other relationships depend on this one.
Welcome back to a very special Halloween episode of Catholic Answers Live. It's Weird Questions for Jimmy Akin, a show we do somewhat regularly here on, when we have the opportunity here on Catholic Answers, and we have particular fun with it at certain times of the year, one of them being Halloween. These are almost all questions having to do with monsters, ghosts, vampires, and the like. So it's weird Halloween questions for Jimmy Akin. Jimmy, this one comes from Kelly.
Okay.
Kelly says, I believe in ghosts, or whatever it is that we call ghosts, because my daughter has seen them when she was younger and scared us all. What did she see? If ghosts are real, what are they? Why would someone be able to see them?
Okay, so I guess there are a couple of ways to approach this. The first one is, in terms of what your daughter saw, well, I don't know, because I haven't investigated the case, and so I haven't looked at the alternative natural explanations for what she might have seen. There are natural explanations for a lot of ghost reports. Sometimes when you hear a knocking, it's just an air bubble in the water pipes. Or sometimes when you think you see something, well, it might be in low lighting conditions, and it could be, a floater, or it could be an illusion caused by the darkness, or any number of other things. So I don't know in your daughter's case, but if you eliminate the natural explanations, then what a ghost would be a departed human spirit, and departed human spirits are real, and historically the Christian faith has recognized that departed human spirits can interact with the living, and not just the saints. I mean, we're familiar with things like Fatima, where the Virgin Mary appeared to children, and other saints have appeared to people, but it's not restricted to that, at least according to classic theologians like Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas was of the opinion that not only can saints appear to people, but so can souls in purgatory. And so can even the damned, if God wants to allow a damned soul to appear. But that's basically what a ghost would be. It would be a departed human spirit that is in some way manifesting. There is an additional, and also I should say, I was going to mention, this is something that has not been controversial. The appearance of ghosts has not been controversial in Catholic circles throughout Catholic history. The idea that ghosts, that departed human spirits don't appear, is an idea that was introduced with the Protestant Reformation. And if you study the history of ghostology, you find that, okay, before the Reformation, everybody is on board in the Christian world with ghosts appearing, and there are regular accounts of it, and, you know, people can study them and so forth. But then along comes the Protestant Reformation. Protestants don't like the idea of praying to the saints. They don't want us to have any contact with the saints. They don't like the concept of purgatory. They don't want purgatorial souls manifesting and asking for prayers. And so come the Protestant Reformation, in Protestant circles, this does not happen. We don't have private revelations because we want sola scriptura. We don't have purgatorial ghosts, so we don't have the saints appearing. We don't want purgatorial ghosts appearing and asking for prayers because we don't like purgatory. And that means the only thing that could ever appear would be a demon.
Oh, I see. I hadn't thought about the logic of that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And even then they don't want to say too many demons are appearing. So the Protestantism became very dismissive of the idea of ghosts, even though it had been a historical part of Christian culture and Jewish culture. You look in the Gospels, when the disciples see Jesus walking on the water, they think it's a ghost. You know, and he shows he's not. And then when they see him resurrected, they think it's a ghost. And he says, you know, handle me, feel me. A ghost, a spirit, has not flesh and bones as you can see that I have. He doesn't say, guys, there's no such thing as ghosts.
Yeah, right.
He says, ghosts don't have flesh and bones, and I do, so I'm not a ghost. So this is actually part of the biblical worldview. But in Protestant circles, it got dissed. And since we're living in a majority Protestant culture historically, you have a lot of anti-ghost rhetoric in our culture, you know. But really, I do believe in spooks. I do believe in spooks. I do believe in spooks. And so that's what they would be. Now, in terms of I should mention there's another thing, though, that is paranormal, that is reported as an explanation for some ghostly phenomena. Now, if you can interact with, and in parapsychology, if you interact with a ghost, if it's capable of like having a conversation or leaving messages or things like that, then that's a good indication you've got a conscious spirit there. But a lot of reported ghost encounters don't have that. Mm-hmm. You'll just see like a woman walk down a staircase, and she'll do it repeatedly, but that's all she ever does. She just walks down this staircase and vanishes. Or you'll see someone sitting in a chair and rocking back and forth, and that's all they ever do. And if you try talking to them, they don't respond. It's like you're watching a recording. And so what's happened in contemporary parapsychology is these repetitive, non-interacting phenomena that don't display consciousness and seem to just be recordings. The proposal is, well, that's what they are. This isn't a conscious human spirit. It's a recording of some kind that was laid down by a living person. Like maybe this was a very special place to them, and there's a kind of residue that they left behind and that you're picking up on now. And that's why all they do is the same thing over and over again, and they don't really vary that routine, because you're essentially watching a kind of, it's like a videotape playing out, just like if you rented, let's say, a movie like Top Hat from, I think, 1931 with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. You can watch Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers dancing, but they're going to do the same dance every time you watch it. And they laid down that recording when they were alive. And so, and it's just, you're just watching it again now. And so the proposal is that some of what people perceive as ghosts, if it's non-interactive, it's probably just a recording. It's a place memory. that somebody laid down when they were alive. So that's the other thing besides the human spirit that a person might perceive. How would someone perceive a ghost? Well, really good question. And I wish that people on ghost hunting shows, of which there are quite a number, would ask themselves this question. Because you'll see people in the ghost industry. This is not real parapsychology. This is like a media phenomenon. But they will have gadgets like electromagnetic field detectors and other gizmos that they will claim will detect ghosts. Ghosts are not electromagnetic phenomena. If they were, we would be able to detect them regularly. We'd be able to detect them leaving people's bodies when they die. There would be electromagnetic energy that would leave the person's body, and we could watch it.
Good point.
And so these devices are not themselves intrinsically capable of picking up a ghost, and you're misleading your viewers when you pretend that they are. I'm not saying ghosts couldn't influence the devices, but that's different than saying the device can just detect them.
Yeah.
Also, there's scams in this. I'm aware of a alleged ghost detector that's really a cat toy that has been rebranded and sold as a ghost detector when it's just a little ball. Yeah.
They're
it's
messing
a
with
little ball for cats to play with, and it lights up. Well, it gets sold as a ghost detector. And a lot of the junk you see on Amazon is like that. But how would someone really perceive a ghost or a haunting? Because that's what the recording is called. It's called a haunting if it's a recording. Well, mentally. So this would be some kind of telepathy. It would be a form of mind-to-mind contact in the case of an apparition where you're talking to a departed human spirit. They don't have a voice. They're not literally moving the air. So this would be some kind of mind-to-mind contact, just like angels have with each other. I mean, angels can communicate with each other, but they don't have lips. They don't use matter as an intermediary instrument to transmit sound waves. So angels speak mind to mind. And presumably human souls, if we're going to be able to talk to angels in the afterlife, for example, or talk to other human souls, even when we don't have a body. So this is probably, and historically, medieval theologians did view this as a native faculty of the human soul. And so it would be some kind of mental perception. It may not be distinguishable from a physical perception. It may be vivid enough that you don't recognize this is just happening in my mind. And there are lots of reports where people see a ghost and don't realize it's a ghost until it, say, vanishes all of a sudden. So you could have, at least according to the literature, you could have a fully realistic impression of a ghost and think it's coming through your physical eyes, but it's really a mental perception, either transmitted by the ghost or your own abilities. And that also, your own abilities potentially would allow you to pick up on a recording and see a haunting. So it would be some kind of mental perception. But I hope that's a helpful answer.
Kelly, thank you very much for that series of questions. Most of the questions have been kind of theoretical today, and I appreciate occasionally getting a good practical question in. And I know that I appreciate Mr. Michael, who sent the following question, which is just practical. It's about something you really need to know, and I'm looking forward to finding out the answer to it. If you lean too close when you're blowing out your jack-o'-lantern, can the pumpkin suck out your soul? And see, this is the kind of stuff, this is not just like, oh, pie in the sky. This is stuff that if I know the answer to this is going to be helpful to me. So thank you, Mr. Michael.
Yeah, so the jack-o'-lantern itself, the pumpkin cannot suck out your soul. The pumpkin is a vegetable.
There you go.
And vegetables don't have the ability to suck souls, except perhaps in Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Another Halloween-themed movie.
There you go.
But you can burn your hair if you get too close, so don't get too close.
But cats can suck out your soul. Am I wrong about that? Or
There is evidence to that effect.
Okay, very good. Mr. Michael, thank you very much for finally asking a practical question. Jimmy Akin is our guest. All of the questions are... Go ahead. You want to say something?
Well, actually, I was going to say, for people who may not be aware, that thing about cats stealing your soul or taking your soul or sucking your soul, that's based on a real phenomenon, because you had sudden infant death syndrome. And in the past, people would think the cat has stolen the baby's breath.
Oh, because cats love to smell baby's breath. I mean, it's very sweet to them.
And babies are warm, and they want to sit on them and be around them, and they don't move a whole lot. And so the cat's around the baby accidentally dies.
Oh!
Correlation equals causation. It's the cat that did it.
All right, now I feel bad for the cats. They've been blamed, and it wasn't even their fault. And it's not the jack-o'-lantern's fault. We'll be right back with more weird Halloween questions for Jimmy Akin, and some stuff that's really useful that could be helpful to you right after this. Catholic Answers Live.
Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says Cy Kellett. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, Cy presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Have you enrolled in the Catholic Answers School of Apologetics? Let me ask you a more important question. Do you believe as a Catholic that you have an obligation to share the Catholic faith? In fact, the Church has answered this question, and the answer is that all confirmed Catholics are obliged to share the faith. It's actually in canon law. Catholic Answers is here to help you fulfill that obligation. Our School of Apologetics courses will equip you to help all the people you come in contact with understand what the Church teaches and why. A great place to start is with all the Catholics in your life. Learn the art of apologetics from the best of the best and start sharing the gospel today. Visit schoolofapologetics.com. That's schoolofapologetics.com.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
Welcome back to this Halloween edition of Catholic Answers Live. Once again, I think I don't know. Sometimes they move the holy days, but you can't move the feast of All Saints Day, right? So
it's an immovable feast.
Immovable feast, and but does everyone everywhere have to go to mass, or is it one of those feasts where it depends on what you're?
It depends on the area you're in. I mean, for a start, the holy days of obligation of the Latin Rite apply only to the Latin Rite. Oh, yeah. And even within the Latin Rite, the Vatican gave the local bishops' conferences the ability to add or suppress or move different days. And so it's a decision that's made by each bishops' conference, or at times, I mean, in a given year, like if November 1st falls on a Saturday or a Monday, the local bishop might dispense with it.
I see.
Or the national conference might. But in some countries, they've got 2 holy days of obligation, like Canada. 2.
All Saints and All Souls?
No. Christmas and Nativity of Mary.
Oh, I see. 2 in total for the whole year.
Whole year. Yeah. And when the Vatican did this, they kind of in a back channel said, we want Christmas, So, so Christmas is we want you to keep Christmas, and we want you to keep one of the Marian ones. And it's so in some countries it's like just December 25th and January 1st.
Oh, I had no idea. I'm glad I asked you that. All right. Okay. Next Halloween weird question. This comes from Frank, and this is from his own experience. Frank says, "I know someone who died, and he was very possibly in mortal sin. His wife died a few years earlier. She was a good, faithful Catholic. He spoke to 2 different relatives probably within an hour after he had just passed, and he revealed to them that he was not in the same place as his wife. He said that he could not see her. Both relatives didn't even know he had passed away. He spoke to them in their dreams with the same message. How does that happen?"
Okay, so this is another instance of what's known as a crisis apparition, where a person who is in a crisis, sometimes a fatal one, appears either just before or during or just after the crisis to other people, usually people they know, like relatives. And so at least based on the way this experience presents itself, this gentleman died. That put him in crisis. And shortly after his physical death, he then appeared to these 2 relatives in their dreams within an hour of this happening. Now, of course, as with anything, I'd have to check it out. But assuming all that's true, I would say, well, this is a credible experience. If you have 2 relatives who don't know that someone is dead, and they, on the same night, report dreams of this person at the time the person died, even though they didn't know the person was dying. And if they report the same message, like, I'm not seeing my wife here in the afterlife, I would say that's a pretty striking experience. Assuming that's all true, that's quite significant. So what might we explain? How might we explain him not seeing his wife? Well, I think the explanation that Frank is wondering about is, does that mean he's in hell and his wife is in heaven? Because he said the wife was a good, faithful Catholic and the husband was very possibly in mortal sin. So maybe he went to hell, maybe she went to heaven. Well, that's a possibility. I can't rule that out. On the other hand, I see other possibilities as well. While Thomas Aquinas was of the opinion that God could allow the damned to appear to the living, it was only like for a special reason, like to scare them back onto the straight and narrow or something like that, a warning of what could happen. But at least based on what you've said here, it doesn't particularly sound like that. And so I would be inclined to explore a couple of additional possibilities for where this gentleman might be and why he couldn't see his wife. One is maybe she's in heaven and he's in purgatory, and that's why he doesn't see her. Or the afterlife's a big place. I mean, if I go to a shopping mall, like suppose I'm married, and I go to a shopping mall where I know my wife is, the minute I walk into the shopping mall, that doesn't mean I'm guaranteed to see my wife. She could be mixed in the crowd or in another store, another part. She could be in the food court, and I could be in Dillard's or who knows what. So as Jesus says, there are many mansions in my Father's house, and we're not guaranteed to see our loved ones the instant we get there. So that might have been part of his experience as well. He was looking forward to seeing his wife. He gets there. He doesn't see her immediately. It's of concern to him or something, but he at least reports it to living relatives in their dreams.
Frank, thank you very much. I hope that was helpful to you. We continue with more weird questions for the holiday. What's the number? Yeah, it's kind of a holiday for.
It is a holiday.
Yeah, for. I was just thinking you don't really get the day off for it, which you should. I mean, I'm all in favor. More days off. You know me. I'm always advocating more days off. But so this one, so it's weird questions for Halloween, and this one comes from Thomas. Is Father Amorth fake and or just a product of the satanic panic? If he is fake, is he sincere in his beliefs, or is he some type of satanic panic grifter like Mike Warnke and Zachary King? I just want to say I don't know these people, so this is the question. In the case of Father Amorth, I still believe in exorcism, but Father Amorth's claims and documentaries make me think that he is not a good exorcist.
So Father Gabriel Amorth was an exorcist of the Diocese of Rome, and he was a big self-promoter. And he wrote a number of books and did a lot of interviews and things like that. And he got billed by a lot of people as the Vatican's chief exorcist, which is not true. The Vatican does not have a chief exorcist. He did not work at the Vatican. He was a priest of the Diocese of Rome, and he was also an exorcist, but he gets billed as, the head exorcist over there. He had a gift for self-promotion. I'll give him that. He also made a lot of claims that are really problematic. He claimed to have performed tens and even over 100,000 exorcisms in remarkably short spaces of time in ways that wouldn't seem to comply with the usual approval process required for exorcisms. He also said other things like all Nazis were possessed. Okay, well, that's just not true. All Nazis were not possessed. So I would be very cautious around claims made by Father Amorth. He's no longer living. I don't have reason to put him in the same category as someone like Mike Warneke, who was an alleged satanic high priest that emerged and kind of had a ministry to evangelicals, but who has been proven to be a fraud. So I don't have evidence that Father Amorth was a fraud, but I do have evidence that Father Amorth made a lot of really sketchy claims, and people should not simply take whatever he says at face value. They need to be quite cautious. And if you'd like more information on that, the canon lawyer Edward in Peters wrote a review of one of Father Amorth's books, and hopefully we can have a link to it. But if you Google Edward Peters and Gabriel Amorth, the review should come up.
Thanks very much, Thomas, for that question. Let's see. We'll go to Adam's question now. Could a gateway to hell exist, such as the legend of Stull, Kansas?
So I'm not familiar with the legend of Stull, Kansas, but in terms of could a gateway to hell exist, it's going to depend on what you mean. Hell is a non-physical realm, and thus you can't literally have a gateway to something that's not a place. Gateways connect two different places, and if one of the places is not a place, if it's not a physical place, and you couldn't have a physical gateway to that place. On the other hand, if you just mean, could there be an area where there's a lot of activity by inhabitants of hell, like demons or damned souls? Well, sure, that can happen. If you have a house, for example, that has been, the technical term for it is not possession, but infestation. You could have a house that is infested with demons, hypothetically damned souls also. And so you could have a place that's infested with people from hell, and if you wanted to call that infested place a gateway, you could call it that. So I could see that happening. It also then would be possible to get rid of the gateway by doing the appropriate exorcistic rituals and getting rid of the problematic folks there.
Adam, great question. Thank you. If there's going to be a gateway to hell, Kansas would shock me as the location, but yeah, you never know about these things.
Also hear about a highway to hell, but I think that's different.
I have heard about that. We're going to take the highway to a break right now. We'll be right back with more weird questions for Halloween with Jimmy Akin.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
We have a big problem. Our culture is dying, and souls are in danger of being lost. The answer is conversion to Jesus Christ in His church. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a Catholic organization, and we have hundreds of teams spreading the good news throughout the country. But we need your help. The harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
I told him about the woman who came to me and said her 2 children hadn't spoken to each other for 2 years. Their grandma died, and she was very wealthy. She left half to each one. She said they're arguing over a commode. She said it's inlaid. Can you imagine being in hell and somebody saying to you, what are you here for?
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. For Halloween, we're doing Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin, which is the best thing you can do for Halloween. So, well, other than get free candy. I mean, I'm sorry, Jimmy. Love doing the show with you, but free candy.
Okay, goodbye.
Wait, no. I need you for at least 20 more minutes.
No. Do I get free candy then?
Oh, yeah. I would be happy to give you free candy if you'll stay 20 more minutes. Yes, absolutely. Darren, buy some free candy for Jimmy. Oh, Darren's on it. Very good. Mandy asks this. My daughter Lauren would like to know the history of the tradition of carving pumpkins and if it had any connection to the Catholic All Hallows Eve.
Yes, it does have a connection to All Hallows Eve, and it was a custom that developed in Gaelic circles, so think like Ireland and Scotland. Now, they didn't have pumpkins in Ireland and Scotland. They did have gourds, but they also had turnips, and they seemed to like them. But they would take a large turnip and they would hollow it out and carve a face on it, and then they'd put a candle in it, and it would become a jack-o'-lantern. Jack is, a form of the name John, and in the British Isles, Jack is a common way of referring to any man.
Like Spring-Heeled Jack.
Or Spring-Heeled Jack is an example. Or Jack Tar is a famous name for any sailor. A sailor is a tar because they would use tar or, to seal up ships and stuff. So a sailor is sometimes called Jack Tar. Or the toy we have, the Jack in the Box that springs up, that's the man in the box that springs up. And you'll hear phrases like every man Jack of them, because John is the most common name for men in English. And so Jack became a nickname for every man in English. And so if you've carved the turnip into a face like a man, it's a jack. And it's got a candle in it, so it's like a lantern. And so that's why they're called jack-o'-lanterns. And people would take them at All Saints' Day. They would also be called sometimes soul lights. And they would originally represent like souls in purgatory that need people's prayers. And that's how people would carry them at this time of year when Halloween and all the Irish immigrants and Scottish immigrants came over to the New World. Well, we have pumpkins here. And so the custom got transferred from like carving turnips or gourds into carving a specific type of gourd, a pumpkin. And over time, they've become more elaborate and people, set them out in front of their houses and stuff. But that's the origin of the customs, Lauren.
Mandy, thank you for that question. Lauren, thanks for asking your mom that question. We come to another practical question, this one from Leslie. Jimmy, is serving candy corn a mortal or venial sin?
Well, it depends on whether the person you're serving it to has extremely fragile type 1 diabetes that's not controlled by medication or not. Personally, I like candy corn. I almost never eat it because I almost never eat candy, but I like it. Whether it would be sinful at all is something that will really depend on the situation. And most of the time it would be venial at most or even not sinful at all.
What about the people who give out carrots to kids?
Well, that's just wrong.
That's just not how we do this. That is the wrong way to do Halloween. Thanks, Leslie. I hope that helps you. This one comes from Ryan. Ryan asks, I hear demons are not able to reveal a person's sins if the person already went to confession. And demons especially hate Latin. Are either of these true?
So one of the classic signs of possession is the manifestation of occult or hidden knowledge. But if you actually read the Rite of Exorcism, which they don't actually publish, they keep that on a kind of need to know basis, but that didn't stop me from getting it anyway. It notes that merely having occult or hidden knowledge is not enough, because there are non-demonic ways of learning secret things.
Sure.
That can happen through divine revelation. It could happen psychically. It could happen in other ways. But demons theoretically could know your sins and might reveal them. Like if you're trying to get a demon out of somebody, if you're in the middle of an exorcism, the demons will try to do things to demoralize the people performing the exorcism, and they might start spilling the beans on what some of their sins are. It would be great if they're not able to do that, if you've been to confession. And I know people, will go to confession frequently before they participate in an exorcism, but I don't know of any proof that this is the case. So it's a nice thought that demons might not be able to do this, that there's something forbidding them from saying what your sins are. I mean, we're assuming they know what your sins are. They might have just been watching you when you sinned. And they, so that it may be perfectly straightforward how they know your sins. And unless there's some law from God blocking them from saying those words in an exorcism, I don't know of anything that would restrict them from doing so. And I don't know of any such law from God. So it's a nice thought, but I would be skeptical. Do they especially hate Latin? Well, they don't have lips or ears, so they don't especially hate any human language. I would think, though, that if you're exorcising a demon and you're using Latin, it could have an additional effect on the demon, but not because of the Latin itself. It would be because of what the Latin means to you as a person. So if you have an exorcist and to him Latin is associated with God and liturgy and things like that, and it has a special meaning for the exorcist or for other people participating in the exorcism, then that might add some extra heft to it. But it's not because of the Latin. Jesus exorcised demons in Aramaic. Others exorcise them in Greek. If you were, say, a Melkite Christian who has a Greek-speaking church that uses Greek in its liturgical language, then demons might respond better when you use Greek, because to you, Greek is a sacred language. And so I don't think it's going to be because of the nature of the language. Demons aren't really going to care. I mean, Latin wasn't even invented by Christians. It was invented by pagans. So it's not an intrinsic quality of the language that makes it have any special effect. I think it would be the beliefs of the people using the language about the language. If it makes them feel more confident and more in touch with God and sounds more authoritative to their ears, then it might have extra oomph, but it would be because of the people, not because of the language.
Ryan, thank you very much for the question. We continue with weird questions for Halloween for Jimmy. And this one comes from Rob. Rob asks, Catholic apologist Matt Fradd does a horror podcast called Sibling Horror. I did not know that. Matt does a very fine Catholic podcast. But this must be a side hustle.
He writes it with his sister.
Very good. Okay, so cool. So Catholic apologist Matt Fradd does a horror podcast called Sibling Horror. It can get pretty spooky. My question is, can someone listening or writing such stuff put them in any danger of even an occasion of sin, since it could be entertaining thoughts and scenarios that could lead down a dark path? Or is that something that would change depending on the inclination of the specific individual?
So I've heard some sibling horror. I've even consulted for Matt. I sometimes do plot consulting for friends because I have a mind that kind of analyzes plots, and I can come up with ideas that they may want to use. The question as phrased is there any danger of even an occasion of sin? Well, when you put it that way, yeah, because there's always a danger of an occasion of sin, because our minds will generate temptations no matter what we're doing. You know, sitting quietly and praying in church can have a danger of an occasion of sin, because you might become tempted to think about bad stuff and endorse bad stuff with your will. So absolutely everything, because of human fallenness, has some danger of becoming an occasion of sin. But that's something that varies entirely from individual to individual. And for most people, simply listening to something spooky is not going to cause them to commit sin. We are, in fact, wired to find, and this is part of God's plan, we are wired to find spooky stories entertaining. This is part of all drama and literature. In order to find literature interesting, there have to be stakes. There has to be something at risk. There has to be something at hazard. If you're watching something and there's no risk and no danger, there's no excitement, there's no interest in the story. And this has to go to the reason why we find stories interesting in the first place. It's a form of training. If you look at kittens and puppies, they will play fight. You know, it's fun for them. They want to bite and stuff and you know, bat at each other, and they will play fight. And the reason they do that is because it's training them for when they're adults and they may have to handle themselves in real fights. So they're not able to handle themselves in a real fight at this stage. So what they do is they're programmed to train themselves for real fights. They need to find it fun. That's why play fighting is fun, but it also needs to be safe. And so that's the essence of play. It's undertaking a dangerous activity in a safe way as a way of preparing yourself to deal with real dangers. And the same thing is like why humans play games as children, or why we like roller coasters. It's simulated danger, but it's really safe, and that makes it fun. And the same thing is true of horror stories and mystery stories, and really any story, but especially ones like, I mean, even Pride and Prejudice. You know, are these two people going to get together or not? Yeah. You know, that's the essence of drama, and horror fiction is simply a particularly acute form of it. But what God does is he's programmed us to find drama and scary things fun to enjoy in a simulated way, as a way of helping us process feelings and think about real dangerous situations that we may one day encounter in life, so that we'll have some background. It's like, I've never been in danger before. What am I supposed to do? I've never even thought about danger. Well, that's what horror fiction gets us ready for.
I've never even thought about danger. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
all that stuff is, yeah.
And so there's nothing for a normal person. Now, some people are broken in particular ways that will make it not suitable for them. But for a normal, healthy person, there's nothing wrong with horror fiction. Now, it may or may not be your thing, but simply because something involves darkness does not mean it's sinful to read or think about. Because if that were the case, you couldn't read the Bible. The devil makes on-screen appearances in the Bible.
Yeah.
Okay, he tempts people. He tries tempting Jesus. He does all kinds of bad stuff in the Bible. Well, I mean, you look at the book of Revelation from one perspective, there's a big horror element in that book. But it's not sinful to read it. Now, there may be individual people who have a form of weakness that means they shouldn't. But for most people, this is not something we should be scrupulous about.
So, to sum up, after you have watched Jimmy or listened to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, however you find it, and after you've caught up on all your Catholic Answers stuff, you can go ahead and listen to Matt Fradd. I think that's what Jimmy is saying. I'm just...
Sibling horror, yeah.
Jimmy, thanks very much. I hope you have a very happy Halloween.
My pleasure, and happy Halloween to everybody.
And tomorrow, open forum, I believe. Yeah, just plain old, straight up open forum. We'll see you then. God willing. And please do drive careful. I'm going to say it again. There are little people out there. Slow down just a little bit. See you tomorrow, God willing, right here, Catholic Answers Live.